Cole spotted the dog from nearly 100 yards away, black fur stark against the white field, head low, moving through the snow with steady purpose. When it reached him, he saw the scrap of paper tucked under its collar, damp but legible. For words, written in hurried, uneven letters, "Don't look for me." Before Cole could speak, the dog turned, sprinting toward the dark line of trees at the edge of the property. The wind came hard across the open field, flattening the snow in quick, rippling patterns. Cole stood with the note in one hand, his glove barely keeping the damp from seeping through. The ink had run in places, but the words were still there, burned into his mind. "Don't look for me." He stared at the treeline where the black K9 had disappeared only moments earlier. The dog hadn't looked back once, just a straight, deliberate run into the forest. Cole's boots sank deep as he started after it. The air here bit at his face, dry and cold enough to make his eyes water. Each step crunched loud in the silence, the sound swallowed quickly by the thick, snow-laden pines ahead. The closer he got to the edge of the forest, the heavier the air felt. The snow was thinner here, patchy in places where the ground was bare and frozen solid. A single set of paw prints cut through it, fresh, sharp-edged, heading deeper. Cole paused at the treeline, scanning. He'd been here before, years ago, on a search and rescue call. The locals called it Dead Hollow. No one liked coming in unless they had to. He tucked the note inside his coat, making sure it wouldn't blow away, and pulled his scarf up over his nose. The forest swallowed him in 3 steps. The temperature dropped instantly. Snow clung to the branches above, and every so often, a clump would fall, breaking the oppressive quiet. The paw prints ahead were still clean, no wind had yet erased them. Cole kept his pace steady, scanning left and right. The trees here grew too close together, their trunks twisting in ways that didn't look right, like they'd bent over time to lean toward each other. After about 10 minutes, the paw prints veered sharply right. Cole followed, ducking under a low branch. The silence pressed in harder, the air thicker. He froze when he saw the first scrap of fabric. It was caught on a splinter of bark, torn and fluttering weakly in the wind. Pale blue, thin, like part of a dress. Cole tugged it free, turning it over in his glove. The edge was frayed, but there was no frost on it, it couldn't have been here long. The dog's tracks moved past it without pause. Cole kept going. Another 100 yards in, the ground dipped sharply into a shallow gully. At the bottom, a thin layer of ice stretched across a frozen stream. The paw prints crossed without hesitation. Cole's boots slid slightly on the slick surface, and his breath came harder now, both from the cold and the nagging sense that he was already too far in. On the other side, the prints climbed the slope, weaving between 2 old, hollowed-out pines. That's where he heard it. A low, short bark, muffled, like it came from deeper ahead. Cole moved faster, boots crunching over roots and frozen leaves. The bark came again, followed by the faintest rustle, like someone moving quickly through underbrush. He crested another small rise and saw it, the dog, about 30 feet ahead, standing still. Its fur was dusted with frost, its breath hanging in the cold air. The note was still tucked under its collar. "Hey!" Cole called. The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't come to him. Instead, it turned, trotting forward again. Cole followed. The terrain grew rougher, uneven ground, patches of ice under a thin layer of snow. The trees here were thicker, leaning in so close that the light dimmed. Cole glanced up once and realized he couldn't see the sky anymore, just the tangled web of black branches overhead. They passed another scrap of fabric, this one snagged lower to the ground, almost at his boot level. It matched the first. Cole's pace slowed. He wasn't sure if the dog was leading him to her or away from her. The paw prints led into a narrow path between 2 rock faces. The stone was slick with frost, the gap just wide enough for Cole to squeeze through. On the other side, the ground opened into a small clearing. At the center was something that made him stop cold. A wooden post, weathered and gray, stuck up from the frozen earth. Tied to it was a strip of the same pale blue fabric. Beneath it, paw prints circled once, then continued into the trees beyond. Cole approached slowly, scanning the ground. Around the base of the post were smaller footprints, human. Barefoot. The toes had dug into the dirt before freezing over. They led in the same direction as the dog. Cole's heart thudded in his chest. He'd been in enough bad situations to recognize a trail that wasn't accidental. Someone wanted him to follow. The dog barked again, sharper this time, from somewhere ahead. Cole left the post behind and pressed on, his senses on high alert. Every sound, every creak of ice, every shift of snow, seemed too close. The tracks began to climb again, up a slope where the snow grew deeper. At the top, Cole stopped short. Ahead, the forest dropped away entirely into a steep, rocky descent. At the bottom, partially hidden by fallen branches, was the dark mouth of a cave. The dog stood at the entrance, waiting. Cole's breath came fast now, the cold cutting deeper into his lungs. He started down carefully, boots sliding on loose rock and snow. By the time he reached the bottom, his hands were cold despite the gloves, and the air felt heavier than before. The dog turned and vanished inside the cave. Cole hesitated at the mouth. A faint draft came from within, warmer than the air outside, carrying with it a smell he couldn't place, damp, metallic, and faintly sweet. He reached into his coat, feeling the note still there, crumpled slightly from his movement. "Don't look for me." But he was already here. He switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark, catching on slick rock and thin drips of water. And then, just at the edge of the light, something moved. Cole's flashlight beam cut a narrow cone through the dark, the edges swallowed almost instantly by the black stone walls. The entrance behind him narrowed into a jagged arch, framing the cold daylight outside. Snow drifted in, catching in the beam like dust motes. Shadow, that's what Cole decided to call the dog, had already moved a dozen feet in, his paws making no sound on the damp stone. The folded note was still visible under his collar, its corner darkened with moisture. Cole followed, boots slipping on patches of frost where meltwater had refrozen. The air inside was different, warmer, yes, but dense, almost wet, with that faint metallic scent growing stronger. The ceiling dipped low in places, forcing Cole to duck. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere deeper in, the sound echoing strangely. Every so often, a breeze pushed through, carrying a whispering sound that made him stop more than once, certain someone was speaking just out of earshot. The dog kept glancing back at him, making sure he was following, then moving ahead again. They came to a split in the tunnel. The left path sloped sharply down, water glistening on its surface. The right path rose slightly, drier, with faint marks on the stone floor, scratches, like something had been dragged along it. Shadow didn't hesitate. He took the right. Cole followed. The walls here were closer, the passage barely wide enough for him to move without brushing his shoulders. The beam of his flashlight caught something ahead, another scrap of fabric, pale blue like the ones he'd found in the forest. This one was tied in a knot around a small protrusion of rock, the ends fluttering faintly in the moving air. Cole stopped and touched it. It was damp, but not frozen. "She's marking a trail," he murmured to himself. The thought was unsettling, either she wanted someone to follow, or she wanted him to follow specifically. Shadow was waiting a few steps ahead, watching him. Cole untied the scrap and pocketed it, then kept moving. The tunnel widened abruptly into a small chamber. The ground here was uneven, a mix of stone and packed earth. Against one wall lay a bundle of something covered in a torn blanket. Cole approached carefully, his flashlight steady. It wasn't a person, it was a pile of clothing, mostly worn-out coats and boots, many of them covered in a thin layer of dust. They looked abandoned, like they'd been here for years. He crouched, brushing at the dust. Under one coat, he found a cracked leather satchel. Inside were papers so brittle they tore when he touched them. Faded writing, impossible to read, except for one fragment scrawled on the back of an envelope. "It hears the footsteps." Cole's skin prickled. Shadow gave a short, sharp bark. Cole turned fast. The dog was staring into a narrow crevice on the far side of the chamber, his body stiff, tail low, ears pinned. Cole swung the flashlight toward it. The beam caught movement. Not the girl. Something thin slid back into the darkness, just out of sight. Cole rose slowly, every muscle tense. "We're not alone," he muttered. Shadow growled, deep and low, then moved toward the crevice. Cole followed, keeping his light fixed on it. The gap was just wide enough for the dog to slip through. Cole squeezed in sideways, the stone cold against his back. On the other side, the tunnel dipped again, the floor damp under his boots. The air grew warmer, the metallic scent heavier now, mixed with something else, a faint sweetness, almost like rotting fruit. Shadow moved ahead, his paws silent. Every few seconds, he glanced back, his eyes catching the light like glass. The tunnel took a sharp turn, and then Cole froze. There were footprints here. Bare human feet, small, maybe a woman's or a teenager's. They were fresh, no dust settled in them, no water pooled. The toes dug into the dirt as though she'd been running. They led deeper. Cole followed, pulse pounding in his ears. The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the first. At the center, a small fire smoldered in a ring of stones, its smoke drifting up into a fissure in the ceiling. The light from the fire made the shadows jump across the walls. And on one wall, painted in something dark and glossy, was a symbol. A circle, broken at the bottom, with 3 vertical lines descending from the gap. Cole didn't recognize it, but something about it set every instinct screaming. There was movement behind the fire. Shadow barked sharply, his body lowering into a defensive crouch. Cole stepped forward, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. "Hello?" The movement stilled. A voice came from the shadows, quiet, hoarse, almost like it hadn't been used in days. "You weren't supposed to come." Cole's breath caught. "Where are you?" The figure stepped into the flickering firelight. It was her. The same girl from the note. She looked pale, her clothes thin, her hair tangled and damp. She didn't seem afraid, but there was a tension in her posture, like she was listening for something else entirely. Cole took a step forward. "I found your note." Her eyes flicked to the dog, then back to him. "You need to leave. Now." Cole frowned. "Why?" "What's—" A sound cut him off. From deep in the tunnels behind her, something began to move. Slow, deliberate. The girl's face hardened. "It knows you're here." The noise wasn't footsteps at first. It was deeper, a dragging scrape, like something heavy was being pulled across stone. It echoed through the tunnels in irregular bursts, followed by long silences that felt far too deliberate. Cole's grip on his pistol tightened. Shadow shifted beside him, his head low, teeth bared in a soundless snarl. The girl didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the dark tunnel behind her. "You need to leave before it." A sudden, sharp knock echoed from somewhere deeper. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. Cole felt it in his chest more than he heard it, like the sound carried through the rock. "What is that?" he demanded. The girl's voice was flat. "It's how it answers." "Answers what?" She didn't reply. She turned to the side and began scattering dirt over the small fire with the heel of her bare foot. The flames hissed and died, plunging the chamber into near-total darkness. Only Cole's flashlight beam remained, harsh and narrow, casting hard shadows that seemed to bend toward them. "Hey!" Cole hissed. "Don't." "Light draws it faster," she said, barely above a whisper. "If it sees you, it follows." If it follows, it doesn't stop. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a guess, it was something she'd learned firsthand. The scraping came again, closer this time, followed by a wet, sucking sound. Cole shifted, angling the beam toward the tunnel behind her. For an instant, he thought he saw movement low to the ground, the faintest flash of something pale and smooth, like skin stretched too tight over bone. Shadow growled low, his nails clicking on the stone as he moved forward. "No," the girl hissed sharply, reaching for his collar. The dog froze at her touch but didn't take his eyes off the darkness. Cole stepped forward. "We're not staying here. Move." The girl turned to him, her face faintly illuminated in the beam. "If you try to leave now, it will come faster. The paths change when it wants them to. You'll just end up back here." Cole glanced at the symbol on the wall. "You've been here a while. Long enough." The scraping grew louder. Closer. Shadow tensed, his whole body leaning toward the tunnel now. Cole swept the light back just in time to catch it, a hand. Human-shaped, but the skin was wrong. Wet, grayish, mottled like it had been underwater for too long. The fingers were too long, bending oddly at the joints. It rested flat against the stone floor, then pulled forward, dragging the rest of its body with it. The rest of it stayed mostly hidden, but what little Cole saw was worse, ribs visible through skin, a spine that arched too high, like something had forced it to walk on all fours despite being built for two. The girl's hand clamped on his arm. "Don't let it see your face." Cole stared at her. "Why?" "It remembers faces." That stopped him cold. The thing moved again, faster this time. The sound of it dragging across the stone was sharper now, and in the narrow beam, he could see the smear it left behind, a thin, dark trail that glistened wetly. Shadow barked once, deep and booming, the sound echoing hard in the enclosed space. The thing froze at the sound. Cole's instincts screamed at him to use the moment. "Move," he barked, pushing the girl toward the far side of the chamber. They slipped into a side passage barely wide enough for all three of them. The walls were slick here, moisture running down in thin rivulets. The tunnel angled upward, and Cole hoped it would take them toward the surface. But after only 20 feet, it bent sharply and emptied into another chamber. Cole swore under his breath. The girl's voice was quiet. "Told you." He turned in a full circle, scanning. This chamber was different. The walls were marked with dozens of symbols like the one in the first chamber, all painted in the same dark, glossy material. Some were smeared, like they'd been touched after drying. Shadow sniffed the ground near the far wall, his nails clicking faintly. Cole kept his weapon ready, his light sweeping over the marks. "What do they mean?" "They're warnings," she said. "Not for us. For it." That didn't make sense. Why would it need warnings? She finally looked at him directly. "Because something worse put them here." Before Cole could ask, the scraping came again, this time from the tunnel they'd just used. The girl's eyes widened. "It's faster now." Shadow spun toward the sound, barking twice, sharp and angry. Cole stepped toward the opposite wall, spotting a gap just wide enough for the dog. "This way." They squeezed through, the stone tearing at Cole's coat. On the other side, the tunnel dipped again, but the air was cooler, fresher. The girl moved fast now, almost running despite the uneven ground. Shadow stayed right on her heels, his movements fluid, silent except for his breathing. Cole glanced back once. The beam caught a flicker of pale skin just at the bend behind them. Too close. "Go," he barked. The tunnel narrowed until Cole had to turn sideways to fit, the rough stone scraping his shoulders. They emerged into a smaller chamber where the ceiling was so low he had to crouch. The girl stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "Listen." Cole froze. At first, he heard nothing, just the sound of his own pulse in his ears. Then, faint and far above, the sound of wind. "There's a way out?" She nodded once. "If it hasn't changed." The scraping came again, much closer now, followed by a deep, wet breath. Shadow barked, the sound fierce and unafraid. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's already in this room." The girl's whisper clung to the air like frost. "It's already in this room." Cole's flashlight beam swept across the low chamber, the stone walls glistening with condensation. Every drip of water seemed louder now, every shift of air too intentional to be natural. Shadow's hackles stood on end, his body rigid, head tracking something just out of sight. Cole's instincts told him to back toward the tunnel they'd come from, but the sound from behind made his skin crawl, a slow, dragging scrape, punctuated by uneven breaths that rattled like they came from lungs that shouldn't still work. The girl moved sideways, pressing herself against the far wall, her eyes locked on a shadow near the floor. Cole followed her gaze, his beam catching movement, a hand, pale and wet, fingers too long, nails cracked and blackened. It rested flat on the stone, flexing once, and then another arm slid into view. The elbows bent the wrong way. Cole forced his voice low. "Don't move." Shadow's growl deepened. His lips curled back, revealing teeth in the dim light. The thing shifted forward. The rest of it emerged slowly, almost like it was testing the space, a torso far too thin, ribs straining against stretched skin. Its head hung low, hair dark and stringy, hiding its face. It crawled on all fours, but its spine arched high, making its movements jerky and insect-like. When the head finally tilted upward, Cole caught just enough to wish he hadn't. Its eyes were milky, but they fixed on the light like they could still see in ways he didn't understand. Its mouth opened slowly, the jaw clicking once before it spoke. "Why, oh you?" The voice was wet, broken, but deliberate. The girl shook her head sharply, whispering to Cole. "Don't answer it." Cole kept his weapon trained. "What happens if I do?" "It will remember you." The thing crept forward another few feet, its hands dragging across the stone. That scraping sound wasn't nails, it was the bones themselves, exposed in places, catching on the rock. Shadow barked once, sharp and booming. The thing flinched, recoiling slightly, before shifting its gaze directly to the dog. Its jaw opened wider, a noise spilling out, not a growl, not a hiss, but something like a slow exhale that rattled the chamber's air. Cole's mind worked fast. If the girl was right, sound and light both drew it. But without either, they'd be blind and easy prey in the dark. He angled the beam toward the tunnel on the far side of the chamber. "Move now," he murmured. The girl hesitated, eyes wide. "It's closer to that exit than we are." Cole took a step sideways, trying to force the thing to track his movement. It did, its head turning in one slow, unnatural motion, vertebrae popping audibly. Shadow didn't wait for an order. He lunged forward, snapping his jaws near its reaching hand. The thing pulled back sharply, its body folding in on itself like it was made of wire instead of bone. "Go!" Cole barked. The girl darted toward the exit, Shadow wheeling around to follow, never letting the thing's movements out of his sight. Cole backed after them, his light fixed on its face, if that twisted arrangement of features could be called that. It followed. The scrape was faster now, more urgent. Every few steps it would lurch forward with an unnatural burst of speed, closing the gap. They reached the narrow tunnel. Cole went last, the stone scraping his shoulders as he forced himself through. Behind him, the thing's breath was closer, the sound wet and ragged. The tunnel angled sharply upward. The air grew cooler with each step, the scent of wet stone giving way to something fresher, maybe snow. The girl stumbled once, her bare foot hitting a loose rock. Cole grabbed her arm and kept moving. Shadow was already at the front, barking twice in quick bursts before stopping suddenly. Cole reached him and froze. The tunnel ended abruptly in a vertical shaft, maybe 15 feet high. Above, faint daylight seeped in through a jagged opening barely wide enough for a person. The girl's voice was strained. "That's the way out." Cole slung his flashlight into his pack and looked up. "I can lift you. Then you pull the dog. I'll climb after." She hesitated, glancing back into the tunnel. The sound was closer now, a rapid, scraping shuffle, like the thing no longer cared about stealth. "Now," Cole urged. She nodded, stepping into his clasped hands. He boosted her upward, muscles straining, until she caught the edge and began pulling herself through. Shadow barked once, spinning toward the tunnel mouth. Cole glanced back, just in time to see the thing's hand shoot forward, slamming into the stone. Its fingers spread, nails scraping deep gouges into the wall. The rest of it followed in a blur of motion, its body folding to fit the narrow space. "Pull him!" Cole shouted. The girl reached down, grabbing Shadow by the collar and hauling. The dog scrambled with his back legs, claws finding purchase on the rough stone until he disappeared over the lip. Cole jumped for the edge, his gloves barely catching it. He hauled himself upward, boots kicking against the wall for leverage. Below, the thing's face tilted up at him. The mouth opened wider than it should have, the jaw unhinging slightly as it let out that same rattling exhale. Its hand reached for his boot. Cole pushed off the wall hard, kicking back. His heel connected with the thing's forearm, and the bone snapped audibly, the arm bending sideways. It didn't scream. Instead, it dropped back into the shadows, the scraping retreat beginning again. Cole didn't wait. He pulled himself the rest of the way up, collapsing into the snow outside. The wind hit him immediately, sharp and freezing, but he welcomed it. Shadow stood guard beside the opening, ears pinned back, eyes fixed on the darkness below. The girl crouched a few feet away, hugging herself for warmth, her breath fast and uneven. Cole sat up, breathing hard. "You want to tell me what that was?" She shook her head. "It's better if you don't know. But now that it's seen you, it won't stop." The cold was immediate, biting into Cole's skin through the damp fabric of his jacket. His breath plumed in the frigid air as he rolled to his knees. Snow crunched under his weight, the sound sharp in the silence that hung over the forest. Shadow stayed close, pressing against his side for warmth. The dog's breath came in quick bursts, his gaze never leaving the black opening in the ground they'd just escaped from. The girl crouched a few feet away, her thin arms wrapped tight around herself, shoulders trembling. Cole scanned the treeline. The forest stretched in all directions, the trunks of tall pines heavy with snow. The sky above was a flat, colorless gray, the kind that promised more snow before nightfall. "How far are we from the nearest road?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "No roads." Cole frowned. "Then where were you headed when you sent the dog?" Her gaze dropped to the snow. "Not away. I just needed someone to see." The wind carried a faint creak from somewhere deep in the trees, like wood straining under a slow, steady pressure. It wasn't the sound of branches in the breeze, it was heavier, more deliberate. Cole rose to his feet, scanning the snow. He expected to see 3 sets of tracks leading away from the shaft, his, the girl's, and Shadow's. But there were more. A lot more. They were faint in places, half filled by drifting snow, but their shape was wrong. The impressions were elongated, the heel too narrow, the toes stretching far ahead in uneven lengths. Some prints were shallow, as though the thing barely touched the ground, others sank deep, as if it had put its full weight into them. They circled the opening in the ground, not once, but multiple times. Cole's stomach tightened. "These weren't here when we came up." The girl didn't answer. Shadow's head snapped toward the trees, ears pricked. Cole followed his gaze. Something moved between the trunks, a shadow gliding low, just far enough away that the details were lost in the haze of falling snow. It didn't move like a deer. "We need to move," Cole said, his voice low. The girl stood, her knees wobbling slightly. "It's following." "No kidding," Cole muttered, already moving toward the densest part of the forest. "We'll use the trees for cover. Keep your head down." They pushed through knee-deep snow, the crunch of each step loud in the cold. The forest swallowed them quickly, the shaft vanishing behind a wall of white trunks and heavy branches. Every so often, Cole glanced back. The strange tracks followed, weaving between theirs like a second trail laid just moments later. After 10 minutes, they reached a narrow stream. The water was partially frozen, the ice along the edges cracking faintly under the current's push. Cole scanned both banks, then led them onto the ice. "Stay in the middle," he said. "Might throw it off." The girl hesitated at the edge, looking back into the trees. "It doesn't need to follow our trail." Cole frowned. "Then what does it follow?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped onto the ice, her bare feet making no sound. Shadow padded after her, his paws sliding slightly before he adjusted his gait. They moved upstream, the ice groaning softly under their weight. The trees closed in overhead, their branches knitting together to block most of the gray light. The further they went, the more the sound of the stream masked everything else. For a moment, Cole thought maybe they'd bought themselves some time. Then Shadow stopped dead, his body rigid, ears pinned forward. Cole froze. "What is it?" The dog didn't move, his gaze locked on the opposite bank. Cole followed his line of sight, and saw it. A figure stood just beyond the treeline, half hidden by a trunk. Tall, thin, shoulders hunched. Snow clung to its head and arms, but it didn't shiver. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally far to one side, like a bird studying prey. Cole's hand went to his pistol, but before he could draw, the figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The girl's voice was barely a breath. "It's not the only one." Cole turned to her sharply. "What?" She nodded toward the trees ahead. He squinted. Shapes moved between the trunks, not fast, not close, but there were at least 3 of them, each moving with that same low, gliding gait. Cole's pulse spiked. "We need higher ground." They followed the stream until it curved sharply uphill. The ice thinned there, forcing them back onto the snow. The slope was steep, the footing slippery under the layer of fresh powder. Cole pushed the girl ahead, keeping Shadow between them. The dog's breathing was steady but intense, his focus unbroken. Halfway up the slope, a sound rolled through the forest, a long, low tone that wasn't wind. It vibrated in Cole's chest, setting his teeth on edge. The girl stumbled, dropping to her knees. "It's calling." Cole grabbed her arm and hauled her up. "Keep moving." By the time they reached the top, the sound had stopped. Cole scanned the ridge, more trees, more snow, and in the distance, the faint outline of a structure. It was a cabin. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney, almost lost in the gray sky. Cole pointed. "We make it there, we lock the doors, we figure this out." The girl didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the cabin. "That's where I came from." Cole's gut tightened. "And you left because of them?" She shook her head slowly. "No. I left because of what's inside." The wind cut sharper on the ridge, carrying flecks of snow that stung Cole's cheeks. He kept his eyes on the distant cabin, watching the faint wisp of smoke curl into the colorless sky. It was the first sign of life he'd seen since surfacing from the tunnels, and that was exactly what made his stomach twist. The girl didn't move toward it. Her bare feet sank into the snow, her arms still wrapped tight around her thin frame. "You said you came from there," Cole said. "What's inside?" She glanced at him, her voice low. "Something that lets them in." The wind gusted again, bringing with it a faint creak from the trees below. It wasn't branches bending in the cold, it was that same deliberate, weighty sound from before. Cole didn't like their odds in the open. "We're going. Now." The girl hesitated but followed when Shadow moved ahead, his tail stiff, every muscle on alert. The slope down to the cabin was steep, the snow giving way under each step. Cole kept the girl close, scanning the treeline for movement. The strange tracks were still there, looping ahead and behind, sometimes veering off only to return again. By the time they reached the cabin's clearing, Cole was sweating despite the cold. The place was small, one story, logs weathered gray, windows clouded with frost. The door was closed but not locked, a simple metal latch hung loose against the frame. Cole pushed it open, the hinges groaning loud in the quiet. The warmth inside hit him instantly, the air heavy with the scent of burning wood and something faintly sweet, almost like fruit left too long in a cellar. The fire in the stone hearth was low but steady. A single chair sat near it, and on the table beside it was a chipped mug half filled with dark liquid. Cole's hand hovered near his weapon. "You said no one's here?" The girl's gaze swept the room, her shoulders tense. "They're not here now." The floor creaked under Shadow's paws as he moved deeper inside, sniffing along the base of the walls. His ears twitched at something Cole couldn't hear. Cole stepped to the window and wiped away a patch of frost. The forest outside was still, too still. "You need to see the back room," the girl said suddenly. Cole turned. "Why?" Her expression didn't change. "Because you won't believe me until you do." She led him down a short hallway to a door with a brass handle polished from use. The wood around it was darker than the rest, almost as if it had been burned and sanded down again. Cole opened it slowly. The smell hit him first, damp earth and rot. The room beyond was small and windowless, lit only by a single lantern on the floor. The walls weren't logs like the rest of the cabin, they were stone, rough and irregular, like the inside of a cellar. In the center was a trapdoor. It was open. The black hole beneath seemed to drink in the lantern's light. Cole crouched, peering down. A wooden ladder descended into darkness, but it wasn't the sight that made his pulse spike, it was the sound. Faint. Wet. Breathing. He glanced at the girl. "This leads to..." She nodded. "Where you found me." Cole straightened fast. "You've been running in a circle." "Not me," she said softly. "Us." Shadow growled low, his gaze locked on the open hatch. His tail didn't wag, his stance heavy with warning. Cole's mind raced. If the tunnels connected directly to the cabin, then whatever followed them could be here already. "We're sealing this." The girl shook her head. "It doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because it's already inside." As if on cue, a floorboard in the main room groaned. Cole drew his pistol. "Stay behind me." They moved back toward the front. The fire still burned low on the hearth, the mug still sat on the table, but the chair had turned slightly, its legs leaving fresh marks in the floor's dust. Cole's pulse pounded in his ears. "Hello?" The silence that answered was heavy. Shadow moved toward the far corner of the room, nose low, sniffing along the wall. He stopped at a narrow seam in the logs, his ears pricking forward. Cole followed his gaze, and saw a faint line of frost along the seam, as if cold air was seeping in from outside. Then, without warning, the seam split. It wasn't a wall at all, it was a door, flush with the interior. It swung inward slowly, revealing another narrow hallway. At the far end, something pale moved. The girl's hand tightened on Cole's sleeve. "I told you." "It doesn't knock." The pale figure stepped forward into the lantern light. It was tall and thin, its limbs too long, its skin the same stretched, mottled texture he'd seen in the tunnels. But its head was wrong, too small for its body, the jaw hanging slack as if unhinged. It took one step into the room, the wood creaking under its weight. Its milky eyes fixed directly on Cole. Shadow snarled, positioning himself between them. Cole raised his pistol. "Stay back." The thing tilted its head. The motion was slow, deliberate, and far past what a human net could manage. Its jaw clicked once, then it took another step forward. The girl's voice was a whisper in his ear. "You can't kill it." Cole kept his sights steady. "Then what do you suggest?" Her eyes didn't leave the thing. "Run." Cole didn't wait for a second invitation. The second the girl's whisper reached his ears, "Run," he was already moving. He shoved her toward the front door, Shadow snapping to follow, his growl still vibrating in the air. The pale thing took another step into the cabin, its long fingers trailing along the wall, nails leaving faint scratches in the wood. It didn't hurry. It didn't need to. Cole's boots hit the porch, snow squealing under his weight. The wind slammed against them immediately, sharp and needling through his jacket. "Stay with me," he barked to the girl, gripping her arm and pulling her toward the treeline. They plowed through the knee-deep drifts, the forest swallowing them after only a few strides. Cole's breath came in hot bursts, freezing almost as fast as it left his mouth. Shadow stayed ahead, forging a narrow path with his powerful body. Behind them, the cabin door groaned open. Cole risked a glance over his shoulder. The pale figure stood framed in the doorway, head tilted, watching them. Then, without a visible movement, it simply wasn't there. "Faster," he ordered, his voice hoarse in the cold air. They broke through a thicker patch of trees, the snow here less disturbed, until Cole looked down. Tracks. Dozens of them. The same elongated, narrow impressions they'd seen earlier. The patterns wound between the trunks in wide arcs, some fresh enough that snow still crumbled at the edges. The girl's voice trembled. "It's already made the circle." Cole stopped. "What circle?" Her eyes darted between the trees. "It traps the ground. Makes it so you can't leave without passing one of them." "That's superstition," Cole snapped. A sound drifted through the air then, faint at first, almost like wind, but it rose steadily into something worse. A low, resonant hum, layered with subtle clicks. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. Shadow froze mid-step, head whipping from side to side. Cole felt the hair on his neck stand up. The sound wasn't random, it was deliberate, patterned, like a language stripped down to its bones. The first shape appeared between the trees to the left. Then another, 20 feet ahead. Then 3 more behind. They were all the same, tall, thin, pale-skinned things with limbs too long, their milky eyes fixed and unblinking. Their movements were slow, precise, each one stepping into view like an actor hitting a mark. Cole's chest tightened. "They're hurting us." The girl's breath hitched. "They don't need to. The circle will close on its own." The hum grew louder, more insistent. The figures began to move in unison now, their steps crunching softly in the snow. The sound they made wasn't heavy, it was careful, controlled, like they were choosing exactly how much noise to make. Cole scanned their formation. The gaps between them weren't random, there was a rhythm to the spacing, each one moving just enough to cut off the most direct escape routes. He turned to the girl. "Where's the break?" "There's always a break." She shook her head. "Only if they let you see it." Shadow barked suddenly, lunging to the right. Cole followed his line of sight. One of the figures had stepped slightly out of sync, its spacing imperfect. "There," Cole said sharply. "Move." They sprinted toward the gap, snow spraying behind them. Cole's lungs burned, the cold slicing at his throat. Shadow led the way, his paws pounding the frozen ground. One of the pale things shifted, turning its head almost completely around to track them. Its mouth opened wide, a wet rattle spilling out, and the rest of the line adjusted instantly, closing the space. Cole didn't slow. "Go low," he ordered. The girl ducked, Shadow bounding ahead. Cole barreled through the narrowing gap, shoulder-checking one of the creatures. It was like hitting cold stone, solid, unmoving. The thing didn't flinch. Its milky eyes simply tracked him as he passed, head swiveling unnaturally to keep him in sight. They broke through the line, but the hum didn't fade. The girl stumbled once, catching herself on a low branch. "It's still behind us." Cole didn't need to look to know she was right. The sound was following, threading through the trees like a net tightening. They pushed deeper into the forest until the snow thinned slightly under the cover of denser pines. The wind dropped, muffled by the branches overhead. Cole slowed, breathing hard, scanning the shadows. "We need cover. Something they can't surround." The girl's gaze darted to the right. "There's an old watchtower. It's high." "Lead," Cole said. They moved quickly but carefully now, the snow crunching less underfoot as they climbed a slight incline. Through the trees, Cole saw it, a wooden structure, leaning slightly, its roof partially collapsed under snow. It wasn't much, but it was something. They reached the base, Shadow circling once before sitting, watching the tree lean. Cole tested the ladder, it groaned but held under his weight. "You first," he told the girl. She climbed quickly despite her bare feet, disappearing through the hatch at the top. Shadow followed, scrambling with surprising agility for his size. Cole was halfway up when the hum surged again. He glanced down, the pale figures stood at the edge of the clearing, all facing the tower. None of them moved closer. Yet. Cole reached the top, pulling the hatch closed behind him. The space inside was cramped, smelling of old wood and dust. Through the gaps in the walls, he could see the figures still ringed around them, perfectly still. The girl sat against the far wall, hugging her knees. "They'll wait." Cole's voice was low. "For what?" She met his gaze. "For night." The first thing Cole noticed as the light drained from the sky was how quickly the forest went silent. Not just quiet, silent, as if the air itself had been stripped of sound. No creak of branches, no whisper of wind through the pines. Even the snow seemed to fall without a sound. From the gaps in the tower's warped walls, he could still see them, the pale figures. They hadn't moved since forming the ring. They stood in their places like sculptures, long arms hanging loosely, heads tilted ever so slightly. Cole kept the rifle balanced across his lap. He knew from training that standing still that long wasn't natural, for anything. It meant they weren't holding their positions because of exhaustion or habit. They were waiting. Shadow sat beside him, not resting, his gaze fixed on the same spot in the tree lean. Every so often, his ears twitched toward a sound Cole couldn't hear. The girl sat against the far wall, knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't spoken since they'd climbed up. Cole finally broke the quiet. "You've been through this before." Her eyes flicked to him. "Once." "And?" "They don't leave until they get what they want." Cole's jaw tightened. "What do they want?" She hesitated, glancing toward Shadow. "The same thing the dog brought you here for." "Proof." The statement made no sense, but before Cole could press her, Shadow let out a low, warning growl. Cole moved to the nearest wall gap, scanning the trees. The figures were still there, but now, some of them were closer. He hadn't seen them move. They just were. The distance between the ring and the tower had closed by at least 5 feet. Cole swore under his breath. "They're shifting in." The girl didn't look surprised. "They always start slow." He kept his eyes on the ring. For several minutes, nothing else changed, until he turned to check another side of the tower and froze. One of them now stood directly under the ladder. Its head was tilted straight up, staring through the hatch. The long, narrow fingers curled and uncurled slowly at its sides. Cole stepped back from the hatch opening, rifle up. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "It won't climb yet. Not until the rest are close enough." That's supposed to make me feel better? Shadow moved to stand between them and the hatch, his stance rigid, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Cole glanced outside again. The ring was tightening, the gaps shrinking. The figures still moved without sound, each step deliberate, synchronized in a way that made the hairs on his arms rise. By the time the last light bled from the sky, they were so close that Cole could make out details, the texture of their pale skin, mottled and stretched thin over sharp bones, the way their mouths hung open just enough to show the gray sheen of their tongues, the absence of breath mist in the cold air. The girl spoke again, voice trembling slightly. When it's dark, they change. Cole looked at her sharply. Change how? As if answering the question for her, the figure at the ladder slowly shifted. The movement was subtle, shoulders rolling forward, limbs elongating in small, unnatural increments, like it was unfolding into something taller, leaner. Its head tilted further back, the angle grotesque. The slack jaw widened slightly, revealing more of that dull gray tongue. Cole gripped the rifle tighter. What happens if they get in? The girl didn't look at him. They don't take you away. They keep you here. Forever. Cole tried to push down the chill creeping into his gut. We're not letting that happen. Shadow barked suddenly, one sharp, deep sound. It was answered immediately. Not by one voice, but by all of them. The hum from earlier returned, deeper now, layered with strange clicks and wet pops, filling the air from every direction. The tower vibrated faintly under the sound, dust drifting from the warped beams overhead. The figure under the ladder began to climb. Cole stepped forward, aiming down the hatch. Stop right there. It didn't. He fired. The crack of the shot shattered the night, the muzzle flash lighting the cramped interior for an instant. The figure dropped back to the snow, but it didn't fall like a body. It landed on all fours, head still tilted back toward him, unblinking. Then it stood again. Cole's breath caught. No effect. The girl didn't move. You can't hurt them with that. Then what can I hurt them with? She didn't answer, but her eyes shifted to the far corner of the tower, where something was half buried under an old tarp. Cole crossed the room, yanking the tarp free. Underneath was a long wooden case, its metal clasps tarnished with age. Inside, nestled in faded red velvet, was a spear. The shaft was black in wood, the tip a dull silver that caught even the faint moonlight. The girl's voice was steadier now. That can. Cole didn't ask how she knew. He gripped the spear and moved back to the hatch. Outside, the ring of figures had begun to move again, closing the final yards between them and the tower. The one at the ladder took another step forward, and this time, it reached up with one hand, curling its long fingers over the first rung. Cole set the spear against the hatch opening, ready. They want you to wait, the girl said quietly. That's how they win. They make you think you have more time than you do. Cole didn't look back at her. Then we won't wait. Cole's knuckles tightened around the spear's shaft, though it warm against his gloves despite the cold that seeped through every other part of him. He could feel the balance of it, heavy at the tip, solid in the grip, and something about the weapon felt older than the tower itself. Shadow's growl was low, steady, vibrating in the floorboards. His gaze never left the pale figure at the ladder. The girl spoke again, her voice small but certain. You can't kill them all. But you can make them let you through. Cole didn't turn to her. That's all I need. He kicked the hatch open with one boot, the sudden movement making the figure below recoil half a step. Snow-damp air rushed in, carrying the faint hum from the others. Cole dropped to the first rung, spear angled down. Shadow, with me. The dog didn't hesitate. He slipped through the hatch after Cole, landing in the snow with a soft thud, his body already coiled for movement. The pale figure below had stepped back just enough to give space, not in fear, but in calculation. Its milky eyes reflected a sliver of moonlight, unblinking. Cole leapt the last 2 rungs, landing hard. His boots sank deep, snow squealing under the impact. The circle was close now, too close. Shapes loomed between the trunks in every direction. The hum shifted, rising slightly in pitch. Cole didn't wait. He moved fast toward the narrowest part of the ring, the girl's words about a break echoing in his head. Shadow flanked him on the left, snarling, teeth bared. The first figure stepped into their path, long arms spreading to block the gap. Cole lowered his center of gravity and drove forward, the spear tip aimed for the space between its ribs. The point hit with a wet, tearing sound. The creature's body arched unnaturally, its head snapping back as a noise somewhere between a hiss and a gurgle escaped its slack jaw. It didn't bleed red. The liquid that welled up around the spear point was thin, almost clear, steaming faintly in the cold air. Cole yanked the spear free and didn't wait to see if it fell. He pushed past, Shadow lunging at the next one, his teeth sinking into a narrow wrist. The creature reacted instantly, swinging its free arm in a wide arc. The motion was too fast for something that size, a blur in the dim light. Shadow ducked under it, snow spraying as he twisted away. Cole drove the spear into the second figure's thigh, the wood shuddering in his grip as the tip struck bone. The thing collapsed halfway, one leg folding awkwardly beneath it, but its hands still reached for him, fingers curling like hooks. He shoved it back into the snow and pushed onward. The ring behind them shifted, the creatures adjusting positions in perfect synchronization. The hum deepened, the sound vibrating in Cole's chest. Shadow darted ahead now, finding another narrow space between 2 trunks. Cole followed, his breath sharp and quick in the freezing air. One of the figures lunged from the side, arms snapping out to grab him. Cole twisted, bringing the spear up in a quick, brutal thrust that caught it under the jaw. The point punched through, the pale head snapping backward with a sharp, wet crack. The thing fell to its knees, not dead, but slowed enough for Cole to shove past. They were through the first layer of the circle now, but another stood just beyond. The girl had been right. They weren't surrounding him to kill him outright. They were hurting him, narrowing the space until every escape route meant passing within arm's reach of one of them. Shadow barked twice, the sound echoing sharply. Cole followed his lead toward a darker stretch of forest where the snow was broken only by narrow animal trails. They pushed through, Cole's legs burning from the effort. The pale figures didn't follow directly, not all of them. Instead, some peeled away, moving through the trees ahead. He caught glimpses of them, pale limbs sliding between trunks, shadows that weren't quite shaped right. "They're trying to get in front," Cole muttered. Shadow veered right suddenly, forcing them up a shallow slope. Cole took the lead again, driving the spear into the snow to steady himself. At the top, the trees thinned, opening into a wide, frozen clearing. The moonlight spilled over the snow, silvering everything. Cole stopped cold. On the far side of the clearing stood a single figure, taller than the rest, its arms hanging lower, its spine arched in a way that made its silhouette jagged against the sky. Its head was tilted so far to one side that it nearly touched its own shoulder. The hum from the forest dropped in pitch, almost reverent. Shadow stepped forward, hackles raised. Cole tightened his grip on the spear. "Guess you're in charge." The tall figure moved then, not with the slow precision of the others, but in a single, fluid step that carried it halfway across the clearing. Cole didn't retreat. He braced himself, spear angled forward. The thing's mouth opened wide, wider than seemed possible, and a new sound poured out, not a hum, but something higher, sharper, almost like the crack of ice underfoot. The other figures stopped moving entirely. Shadow growled, deep and steady. Cole's pulse thundered in his ears. "We take this one, maybe the others break." He stepped forward into the snow, the tall figure closing the last of the distance in a strange, gliding motion. When it reached him, the air around it felt colder, heavier, as if the forest itself were leaning in to watch. Cole drove the spear forward with everything he had. The spear struck true. Cole felt the jolt all the way up his arms as the silver tip punched through the tall figure's chest. The sound it made wasn't the wet, tearing noise from before, it was sharper, almost brittle, like snapping frozen branches. The figure's body arched violently, its head snapping upright for the first time, milky eyes blown wide. A burst of white vapor hissed from its open mouth, curling into the cold air before vanishing. Shadow lunged at the same moment, clamping his teeth on the creature's forearm. The impact drove them both backward, the tall figure stumbling for the first time. The hum from the tree shattered. It wasn't gone, it had fractured into 100 discordant tones, some high and sharp, others low and guttural. The other pale figures twitched where they stood, shifting minutely, their synchronized stillness breaking. Cole yanked the spear free, stepping back. The tall figure staggered, its movements jerky now, as though its limbs had lost their perfect coordination. Then it let out a sound, a long, keening wail that made Cole's vision blur for an instant. The others reacted instantly, moving in toward the clearing. But their movements were no longer perfectly matched. Some turned too soon, others too late. The precision was gone. "This is it," Cole muttered. "We've got our break." Shadow released the creature and darted toward the nearest gap in the advancing line. Cole followed, driving the spear at anything that came too close. The weapon didn't slow them much unless it hit deep, but every strike made them flinch just enough for him to pass. They burst through the first layer of the circle, snow spraying in wide arcs. Cole's legs burned, each stride heavier than the last, but he didn't dare slow down. The forest ahead was darker now, thicker, the snow underfoot broken by roots and uneven ground. Behind them, the tall figure moved again, slower than before, but still too fast for comfort. Its arms swung unnaturally as it followed, the wail dropping into a guttural, rhythmic pulse. "They're calling it back," Cole realized. Shadow barked sharply, cutting left around a wide trunk. Cole kept pace, spear angled to catch anything coming from that side. The hum was gone now, replaced entirely by that awful pulsing sound. Through the trees, a faint light appeared. At first Cole thought it was the moon breaking through the clouds, but the angle was wrong. The glow came from lower, flickering faintly against the snow. The girl's voice echoed in his memory, "They keep you here forever." He pushed harder, Shadow's dark shape weaving just ahead. The light grew brighter until they broke into another clearing. This one was smaller, bordered by thick, impassable brush. In the center stood an old stone arch, half collapsed under the weight of snow. The glow came from within it, though the space it framed was empty air. Except it wasn't. Cole stepped closer, the hair on his arms rising. The air within the arch shimmered faintly, like heat distortion, though the cold here was deeper than anywhere else. Shadow stopped just short of the threshold, looking back at Cole with an intensity that needed no translation. The pulsing was closer now. Cole turned, the tall figure was almost at the clearing's edge, the others spilling in behind it. Their movements were still disjointed, but they were closing the distance fast. He didn't have time to think. He grabbed Shadow's collar with one hand, the spear tight in the other, and pushed forward into the arch. The world shifted. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the feeling of falling, not down, but away. The cold vanished, replaced by a sharp rush of warm air. His boots hit solid ground again, but it wasn't snow. They stood on damp earth, the smell of pine heavy in the air. The forest here was different, thicker, greener, the light softer, filtered through high branches. Cole spun, spear raised, but the arch behind them was gone. So were the pale figures. Shadow stood beside him, panting hard, his eyes still locked on the space where the arch had been. Cole forced himself to breathe, his pulse beginning to slow. "We made it." But the words didn't feel right. The forest was quiet. Not the dead, suffocating silence of before, just quiet. Too even. A rustle came from the left. Cole turned sharply, spear ready. The movement was small, low to the ground. Then a figure stepped out from between the trees. It was the girl. But not exactly. She looked younger, her hair cleaner, her clothes intact. Her bare feet didn't sink into the earth the way his boots did. She smiled faintly, though her eyes didn't quite match the expression. "You found it," she said softly. Cole's grip tightened on the spear. "Found what?" Her gaze flicked a shadow, then back to him. "The way out." Before he could speak again, she stepped back into the trees. One blink, and she was gone. Cole stood there, the weight of the spear suddenly heavier in his hands. Shadow whined once, low in his throat. Cole looked around at the unfamiliar forest. There was no path, no sign of where they were or where they'd come from. The air was warmer, but the unease was worse. Because somewhere, faint but clear, he could still hear it. Pulse.